This is the Collecting Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Purse, here with your co-host, Bill Hamel.
I'm somewhat more comfortable collecting real estate than I am collecting other stuff.
Morning, Bill.
Morning, Stephen. How you doing today?
Good, how are you?
Excellent.
So today we're talking about 162 Ontario Street.
162 Ontario Street. Yes, that's in the city of Albany. It is about 5 houses away from property number 5, which was 2 Kent Street.
Okay, so to get a refresher, which property number is this?
This is number 12th
12.
in our books, I guess you can say.
Okay. And you're sticking with that Pine Hills neighborhood.
Yeah, this is still in Pine Hills, kind of on the border. So it is near the intersection of Ontario Street and Washington Avenue. There's a beautiful park there, Beverwick Park. And it's still in that SUNY Albany prime area for student rentals.
Is it safe to say that you were only interested in that SUNY Albany market?
Well, it had a few. SUNY Albany. Everybody seemed to gravitate to St. Rose as well. It was funny where we would differentiate a little bit. I don't know how much of a difference there really was, but you could rent to SUNY Albany students or St. Rose students in this little corner. This really wasn't a St. Rose area, but we used to think, sometimes, hey, the St. Rose student might be a little bit easier to manage than the SUNY Albany.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just curious if the right deal popped up outside of this neighborhood. You had a couple of Manans, but it seems to be mostly in Albany. If something popped up 15, 20 minutes away, would you have had interest in it? Would you have even gone to see it?
I would say at this point, yes. I was still specifically looking in the city of Albany, so that's where the focus was. But trying to think a little bit ahead. Yeah, without a doubt, it wasn't too much later that we did venture out a little bit. So I know that the mindset was expanding a bit as far as locations.
Okay. And do you remember the date for this one, or at least the year?
I would say 2001, 2002. Yeah, I'm starting to lose dates or lose months for sure. The early ones, are a little bit more rememberable because just getting into the business, you really see or remember when you jumped in. Now properties are starting to accumulate, and I can, I'm actually starting to get a little fuzzy on the years, so I'm able to be in that 2-year area.
You always remember your first one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this wasn't too long after the last property we discussed.
No, this wasn't too long after. I would say it was probably a matter of 6 months, more or less, because at that point we had built some momentum, some serious traction. We were players for sure in the small property market.
Okay. And how'd you find this one?
This one was MLS. It sat, this is the funny one where I explained to people who are just getting into real estate now or have only been in real estate for the last, within the last 10 years. This was the multiple listing service. Property was sitting. This was a bank foreclosure, and it probably sat on the market for 2-3 months as a fixer-upper. It didn't even really need a tremendous amount of work. It was challenging very little, but may have been the reason why it did sit a little bit longer than it should have. It was the 2-family with 3-bedroom, 1-bath each apartment, but it was a little bit smaller than the normal 2-family that we had been purchasing. So it had the 2 normal sized bedrooms, and then 1 bedroom in each apartment was a bit smaller. So these were the days when it was probably my first example where, we started calling this size apartment, 2 bedroom and a den.
Mm-hmm. And were they up and down units?
Yeah, same thing. And that typical up and down 2 family that we had been purchasing in the city of Albany, and just a little bit smaller with that smaller bedroom. You're gonna get a little bit less rent because you're now 2 bedroom in a den, not that 3 bedroom where with the students coming around, you have 3 people looking for an apartment, and they walk through, and who's getting the small bedroom?
They'll be pulling
And
straws.
that's it. And probably 8 out of 10 times they walk out of that showing, and you never hear from them again.
Do you remember about how old this one was?
They're still looking probably 1940 build, which was typical in the Pine Hills neighborhood. 1920 to 1940 was typical. It's funny, these days we're so used to seeing a block subdivision, or an area that was built in like a 2-year span. But back in the good old days, and in the cities, when they used to build things, without power tools and a lot of the luxuries we have now, they literally had to, slug through slowly but surely neighborhoods, and it would take 20 years to get through a certain neighborhood, because it was just a so much slower process on building a neighborhood.
But even with that 20-year process, you would see a lot of similarities from house to house, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They were still building and designing, very, very similarly, very just functional housing, blue collar housing for the city at that point.
Yeah, I think that's something that is important to keep in mind, that you're gonna see the same type of house in a certain neighborhood, and that might work for you or it might not. So was the reason you didn't jump on this one right away because of the size of that bedroom or den, if you would like to call it that?
I would say we were going one property at a time, which it has still been a process that I'm comfortable with. And, based on that last podcast we did, where I get into a certain way of doing things, and for me to change my pattern is hard to do for me. And at this point, if I would have had interest previously, I might have still been in that 572 Myrtle project. So if I'm at 572 rehabbing that house, and this is where that growth thing comes in, I'm not looking. I probably, I was still on the MLS, but I wasn't a major player to jump on something while I was in the middle of another rehab project, because it was literally, I like to go one property at a time.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you're still looking at this one every day? At the end of your day of being a contractor, you're pulling up your computer and you're pulling up the MLS, and you're searching the neighborhood, and you're still taking a look at this one every day, saying, "Oh, it's still there."
Yeah, I would say so, because we own 2 Kent Street, 5 doors down, and we had begin clustering a tiny bit, on that, property number 2 and number 3. We're right in that same area, the same dynamic on North Allen Street and J Street, and property number 7 and number 8, 862 Washington and 864 Washington. And, we saw that ability to group properties together and have that efficiency. So owning 2 Kent Street, I was definitely staring at this 162 Ontario Street, and I had looked at it without making a move on it. And, with that same idea that a lot of people will always think about, if something's been on the market, why is this sitting? Why is this sitting? Because at the time, real estate wasn't super hot in this regard, this type of neighborhood. But it was being priced at like $43,000, didn't need a whole lot of work. You rent the units out, whether there's students or not. it would have cash flowed. It was a no-brainer as far as that goes.
So I'm surprised that you didn't feel a sense of urgency to add this to your portfolio when you already had that cluster.
Yeah, I think as time went on, I became more and more interested. So as we were doing that 572 Myrtle project, going home every day, and going home to me meant, going to Clifton Park, the house I grew up in, that I purchased from my parents when they retired, but also going home to not only my partner, Greg, but also a couple roommates. So when you have a couple roommates that, fortunately, all my friends are sharp people, and they pay attention, they see what's going on, they're trying to kind of plan their next moves in life. We're in our late 20s, kind of open canvas in life, so to speak. And my friends at that point, they knew what was going on. They're asking questions. They're seeing, a degree of success, and they're starting to show an interest level.
So is that something that went into play for this property? Your friends started to show an interest level?
That's it. So I had a roommate, Justin, who, he had asked questions along the way. He was intrigued. And this one, he probably came to me, as we're looking at it and talking about it on a daily basis. It's free to come home and shoot the shit. So, I'm probably had brought it up, and, we're finishing up this project on Myrtle. This property is over near our 2 Kent Street property. Don't know why it's sitting there. There's potential with cash flow. And when you're discussing things like that, everyone's wheels start turning, where I don't know exactly how it turned out, but I would, if I was to remember correctly, Justin probably said, "Hey, can I get involved on that one? Let me partner up with you and, see what happens here."
Did you hesitate at all because of complicating things by adding a third partner for bookkeeping purposes and just for trying to keep things simple?
No, well, yeah, I was very, very reserved at that point because, me and Greg had a partnership going, and we were young guys. We were doing very well. We had, a good partnership going, but, there's no perfect scenario, no perfect property. It's hard to find a perfect partnership. Life's not perfect. And at that point, when Justin did bring this up to me, if that was the fact, Justin didn't have a skill set that I had been able to build with, rehabbing a house. Justin didn't have, a real knowledge of what we were getting into because, he had a W-2 job, and, the only learning curve that he had at this point was listening to me and Greg when we were talking about it on off hours. And I think there was a serious reservation there.
So how did you handle that?
Well, we probably just sat there and continued to see that property on the market. And then the fundamentals were there. It just, why isn't this going? And it got to a point where I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm looking at. Justin's interested. It's a way for me to grow a little bit more, where me and Greg may have been absorbed at the time with some other project. But at that time, it's just like, hey, here's a little way that I can grow a little further, partner up with Justin, and we made a deal.
Did you consider not having a partner and investing on your own?
Not at that point. And he may have been the stimulant to buy that house in all reality, where if that didn't occur, I might have, lounged around on that a little bit more, and eventually someone else would have purchased it. So, he is that type of guy when he gets his mind on something, and if he's interested, and, he believes, in something, and he was probably using my and Greg's proof of concept on our previous properties, as his ultimate determiner of, hey, let's do this. And so at that point, I think that might have drove the situation instead of me sitting there focusing on it as a potential solo ride for me. That wasn't the case at all. So I think Justin's level of interest really put me over the top to make a deal on that one.
Did you handle the agreement with Justin any differently because of his lack of experience?
No, it was still a 50-50 partnership. I was going to use my know-how from my experience from the past 7-8 years, and he was responsible for the admin end, along with some of the work. So I was going to man up on, getting the light fix up work done so we can get the property prepared for renters. He was going to handle the admin end, which was his cup of tea because, his W-2 was similar to that. And that's the way it worked out, where, he was handling the tenants, he was handling rent collection, handling tenant issues, and I was more on that physical end.
So this wasn't another heavy lift, not another big rehab?
No, this wasn't a big rehab. There was work to do. And that was an area that me and Justin, it's funny, we talked about it just recently. And, I appreciate everything he has to say because Justin's he's a big fan at this point from mine and Greg's body of work over many, many years. So we had discussions about, our current ventures with scaling up and, getting involved in general partners and limited partners in a syndication structure. So, he brings it up very specifically where, hey, I'm very, very interested. You've been successful, and he really makes me feel good based on appreciating what we have accomplished. And that is why he is just, he's interested without having to get into the weeds of our current deals. He just has that trust factor. He knows that the result is going to be excellent because that's just the way things have worked out. When we get involved in a deal, I'm obsessed, and my deals work because the operations part is probably the easiest for me because I'm going to get it done. But it's funny. My point being on this, where he's just like, man, I'm so sorry how it worked out on that deal we did on Ontario Street, because he feels like he dropped the ball a little bit, because he's great on the admin end, home run, like over the top ability, without a doubt. But when he had to handle some of his responsibilities on the fix up end, which he didn't have any experience, but not only not having the experience, once he had to jump in a little bit, he did not like it. And when Justin didn't like that, he just chose not to do it. And, so I had to fill in those types of gaps. And at the time, that's where partnerships get interesting, to where it's just, it's like, hey, this was the deal. And, it's not going as we expected. And, as we agreed upon, where it's a deal that we had 2 renters. It was cash flowing. It was working. But the partnership wasn't perfect.
Yeah, I think trying to do anything that you're not good at and don't have experience in is hard, and it's not comfortable. I've been taking piano lessons recently, and it's so hard to get your fingers to move the way you want them to. And you see the instructor do it so easily, and so he makes it look so easy. And I try and play, and my fingers just won't do it. And it's so frustrating. And it's anything in life where you have that learning curve. and you're not comfortable, but the only way to do it is just jump in and fail fast.
Yeah, and that's it. And the only thing that I can think of as you're discussing that, it's very, anything in life, whether it be you learning the piano or, us doing what we were with real estate, everybody is very focused on the result. We know the result that we want. You want to be able to play the piano, where you're a good piano player. We want to buy real estate, so it creates good cash flow and in turn is a great investment for obvious reasons. But there's a process to get to that result. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, or most of the time it can be uncomfortable unless you've created that system, to really make that process smoother and more enjoyable. That's the key to so much, enjoying that process. So especially when you're younger, and you love that result that's going to happen inevitably, but sometimes part of that process is a little painful and uncomfortable and unenjoyable. And if you don't work your way through it with some fortitude, then you have a sticking point.
It's such a good point. You really have to embrace the process, and you have to do your best to love the process. So how did the partnership work out after there was a little pullback from Justin?
It worked out well. Here we are. We continue to go home every day, and after work, we're having a couple beers and we're shooting the shit. So, things evolve, and the partnership. Like I said, the property was running perfectly fine, but the partnership wasn't going as planned. So, at that point, I had turned to probably Greg and Justin. I don't know who first, but, at that point, me and Greg had been building a portfolio. So I planted the seed, to both guys saying, hey, what if, Greg bought you out on your shares, and, if we could make a reasonable deal where Justin made some money, Greg was walking into a situation that was still, reasonable as far as his basis on the purchase. And going forward, he would continue to benefit from that property. Then, somehow we can make a deal here. And that's what happened, ultimately for, I think it was probably maybe $10,000-$12,000 Justin was able to make in a year period of time, which is, was a decent amount of money. And, Greg moved in as my partner on that property and continued to run that the way we run anything else. And, it worked.
Yeah, it sounds like it all worked out in the end. So it was a full year after when Greg bought him out. And have you gone through the whole process at this point? You turned the apartments, gotten them ready, and you'd rented them. And so Justin had got a taste of the entire experience.
Yeah, he did. So it was a light fix up. So we had these apartments rented quickly. I think one apartment didn't even need much work at all. So we had one apartment filled almost immediately, the second one shortly after. And by the time Greg jumped in, this thing was just running. And at that point, when, the ownership transition happened, it was already in gear, and we were able to, get things transitioned smoothly. Another lesson in life that I sit here and I think back, I'm like, do I have any examples of where anything that was really important that I had been doing with friends or family didn't turn out well? And not at all. Once again, I guess the name of this collecting real estate episode would be Life Isn't Perfect, but I'll leave that to you. But when it comes right down to it, the value of making that transition where, you're not tarnishing the most important thing in our lives, is that friendship. So we were able to transition this and continue running the business profitably on this property. And, our friendship didn't suffer one bit, between, me, Greg, and Justin. We're fantastic friends up to this day.
Well, I have to use that title now, but that's such a good point that at the end of the day, even if the whole business shits the bed, you're friends. That's the most important thing. You can start another business, you can move to a new state and really start over, but you have your friendship there. What else is more important? So
Oh
Justin was a high school buddy?
Yeah, Justin, I met in high school. So Shenandoah was so big. I always sit there and I ponder. I'm like, okay, with our very strong inner circle of friends, it's very easy to identify, the ones from elementary school. But the ones from junior high or high school, I always have to think back a few minutes. Shenandoah was so big where we had 2 junior highs.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the friends that we met in high school, we didn't meet in junior high because we went to different schools.
Yep. So do you think you would have started a new partnership with someone if you hadn't known him so well? Because this is someone that you knew from your childhood. He currently lived with you. So you're comfortable starting the partnership. I ask because it's a big deal to start a partnership with someone. You're legally engaging in a partnership. You wouldn't marry someone without having a lot of experience with that person. Is that something that you think is your history with him the reason why you got into it?
Yeah, absolutely. We're great friends. We were living together.
Mm-hmm.
So that bond is tight. And what could go wrong when you're in your 20s? It's like, what could go wrong? I know what we're getting into, but focusing on that business part of it, that, I won't let that go wrong. I don't care what happens.
Now, to build on that, if Justin had embraced the process and learned during this, do you think you could have built a whole new portfolio with him, or was real estate just not for him?
Oh boy, who knows? I would say yes. Why not? It would have been, if you're able to do one, and it was, kind of a high five partnership as it went along. Another opportunity comes along that he was able to identify, or something made sense, time and place to partner up on a second deal. I don't see why that couldn't have happened.
With all that being said, is there anything you would have done differently?
Yeah, back in these are the learning days. These are the learning days where
It's always learning days.
I know, but different learning at different periods of your life. When you're in your 20s, or when I was in my 20s, it was more raw. Where on paper I can make this happen, but real life, real human beings, not looking at that, not emphasizing on that enough, meaning, making a deal as ironclad as you possibly can at the beginning, where I think we really did attempt to do that. So this may have just been a learning curve for both of us, where, I was already in it. He got in this type of an investment for the first time with great intentions, and it just didn't go, as close to what we put on paper as it could. And I guess that happens when you're young.
Can you expand on what specifically you learned?
What specifically I learned is maybe to take that, when you are considering partners, to really have the heart to heart, the what ifs, and how important it is for both parties to deliver. And just creating that the ironclad deal at the beginning, so you're not dealing with confusion and things that are difficult and complicated in the middle or the back end.
What are
That's
some of those? What are some of those what ifs that you would go over? Are they far fetched scenarios, or are they once a year type of things?
No, it's right at the beginning. It's this is what I do, this is what you do, and and I don't know at this point looking back. It's what scenarios could I have created that would have made this ironclad? Meaning, okay, what if somebody doesn't do exactly what we agreed to do? Then what if? In all reality, the only regret here was that me and Justin had to go through, some, massaging of our differences, which wasn't fun. It's coming home and having an argument or two or three or four where, I don't want to do that with my friends. That's not my personality at all. I'm not that guy. I avoid confrontation, and that was difficult for me. So I don't know how I would have been able to do it differently with him based on him jumping in for the first time, and how I would have been able to make that original deal as clear as I possibly could to avoid that. I wish I had a better answer for you there.
Yeah, living together certainly adds another layer, makes it more complicated. It sounds to me like you were almost the manager on the project, even though it was a 50-50 deal. You were the one making the decisions because you had the experience. I
Yeah,
feel like that would complicate things.
yeah, and here I am looking back too, and it's one of my faults, where absolutely I was the manager on the deal. I was the controller, I was the micromanager. That's just the way I was at that time. I was like that, up until not that long ago, and that was the, on a macro level, that was the chokehold of my failure in not being able to really turn into an owner, not an operator, once I did accumulate, 230, 240 apartments.
So do you think
I
if you took a step back and you acted as the owner and you treated Justin more like an investor than a partner and you outsourced some of that work, do you think that would have let things run smoothly?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It brings us back to that, to where, and Justin would have done this super well because, he has some serious strengths because he's a very impressive guy. And, now that I'm looking back, boy, do I appreciate that, where one of those discussions after work one day would have been, okay, well, if we're not going to deliver on that physical part of your responsibility, let's focus on, okay, who are we going to get to do that? The property's cash flowing, there's some money there, so Justin, find a subcontractor that's going to fill that vacuum. And at that point, problem solved.
I feel like everything in this business goes back to focusing on the business instead of being in the business.
No doubt.
Is there anything else you want to add for this one?
This one, we continued on. It was, a good property. Me and Greg did end up taking the opportunity, and we sold that not that much down the road. So that was another interesting dynamic where, probably 2 years later, we sold it for, an even greater profit, to where it was like, and it was fine, between the three of us, but Justin had sold out to Greg for a certain amount, and then me and Greg sold for even a greater amount, so everyone's human, where it would have been easy for Justin to be just like, oh man, look at the money you guys made. I left money on the table. But once again, life's not perfect. And, other than that property ran pretty well based on some of our reservations getting into it.
Now, did you plan on exiting that quickly, or did someone submit an offer that you couldn't refuse?
We sold to Kent Street, and this little corner, yes, it's Pine Hills, it's the student area, but if you were to draw a circle, it was right on the edge of that circle of students. So if you went another 2 blocks towards Central Avenue, it was a whole nother element of a neighborhood. And, not the type of neighborhood I was focusing on at all. So, after 2 Kent Street sold, this was just kind of an outlier properties that still existed in the portfolio. And we just took advantage of an opportunity, made some money, and moved on.
Is that something you did as an investor every 5 or 10 years? You take a look at your portfolio and you pick the 2 or 3 that you're least interested in and try and get rid of them?
After we built up a good portfolio, specifically, me and Greg, not so much. Mine and Greg's portfolio was pretty tight, as far as locations. We were very comfortable with them. I'm trying to think of any others that may not have fit that criteria, but, me and Greg didn't sell a lot, if at all, other than flips that we got involved in together, which were planned sales. But then building that portfolio with my brother Mike, we were a bit more aggressive, so we may have gotten involved in some other properties that would have fit that criteria. And as years passed, once we're in for 15, 20 years, and now we've got a property management software and a system, and we're able to generate financials on a monthly basis. Now you're able to measure, all your properties. Simply, we would print off a profit and loss for each individual property for both partnerships. So it gets to a point where, you're looking through those profit and losses over a period of time. And if you're seeing it, let's be real, any portfolio, you're going to have your best properties and your worst properties. It's inevitable. So, we're always focusing on those. If there's a trend where those ones are always on the bottom and they're not performing that great on a cash flow basis, but they have equity, it gets to a point where, hey, if this is not cash flowing to the point where it's worth running, let's just sell it.
So you were also a financial analyst on top of being a contractor and an investor.
Yeah, on a small level. Well,
I think we had a great discussion here. A lot of talk about partnerships, which is so important in this industry.
No, I agree that, once again, getting into this podcast, approaching it, saying, okay, wow, 162 Ontario Street. Geez, what am I going to talk about here? But I guess there was some events here that were a little different.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to the next one. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, David.